The side channel study, Matthew 27. The room was quiet except for the hum of a small refrigerator in the corner and the soft click of Rachel's tablet as she scrolled through the text of Matthew 27. 7 people sat in a loose circle of mismatched chairs, the coffee table between them, cluttered with open Bibles, highlighters, and half-empty mugs. David sat staring down at his page, his thumb nervously tracing the edge of the paper. "I'll be honest with you guys," he said, his voice dropping into the quiet room. "For years, every time I read the first 10 verses of this chapter, I felt this sick, creeping anxiety. I grew up hearing sermons that used Judas as the ultimate scare tactic. Don't sell out for a little cash. So I spent my entire life overfunctioning, trying to perform flawlessly, terrified that if I slipped up, I'd turn into a monster who abandoned God for 30 pieces of silver." Thomas leaned forward, gesturing with his hands to cut through the childhood guilt. "But that's because you're looking at the front and center marketing narrative, David. You're reading the sanitized caricature that systems use to keep people compliant. To get the truth out of a text like this, you have to run what IT security folks call a side-channel attack." Elena frowned, looking up from her Bible. "A what?" "We're studying Matthew, Thomas, not hacking a server." Thomas leaned closer to the table, explaining. "Think about how it works in cryptography. If a system is locked down perfectly, you can't break the encryption through the front door. But as the system operates, it leaks data in ways it doesn't intend. A power fluctuation, a specific sound, or a processing delay. You aren't breaking the code, you are measuring the physical leaks to reverse engineer what's actually happening inside. Authors drop data leaks all the time without pointing a spotlight at them. Look at the timeline in verse 3. When Judas saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse. If Judas just wanted a quick payout, a condemnation meant his plan succeeded. Why would he completely collapse psychologically if he got exactly what he negotiated for? It leaks the fact that he anticipated a completely different outcome. David's eyes widened as the connection hit him. He was standing right there in the garden in Matthew 26:53. He heard Jesus tell Peter, "Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Judas knew the raw cosmic power was sitting right there. He didn't want to kill Jesus. He wanted a warrior king who would crush Rome. He engineered the arrest as a high-stakes tactical play to force Jesus into a corner where he had to launch a revolt. And John 18:11 leaks the exact moment the strategy broke. Jesus tells Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Thomas struck the table lightly. That's it. Judas realizes Jesus didn't lose a power struggle. He refused to enter one. He ordered the sword sheathed because he was actively choosing the cup over the legions. When the morning comes and Jesus quietly submits to the machine, Judas realizes his entire political calculation has vaporized. He didn't force a revolution. He just completed a dirty execution assignment for a corrupt Sanhedrin. David leaned back, a heavy breath escaping him. Wow, seeing that leak changes everything for me. My issue isn't that I'm a monster waiting to sell out for cash. My issue is that I do exactly what Judas did. When I get anxious about my life, or my career, or my family, I try to engineer the outcomes. I try to force God's hand to make things happen on my timeline because I'm terrified of vulnerability. Using this side-channel approach actually gets us past the guilt trips. Living a better Christian life here means dropping the exhausting hustle of trying to control the narrative. It means realizing that when I try to force my own version of a victory, I usually just end up breaking things. I have to learn to trust the path, even when the legions don't show up to rescue me from the hard stuff. The conversation shifted as Thomas directed their attention further down the page to the legal arena where Jesus stood before Pontius Pilate. "Speaking of broken systems," Thomas continued, his voice sharpening, "look at how the religious authorities handle the aftermath in verse 6. Judas throws the money into the sanctuary and hangs himself. The chief priests pick up the coins and say, 'It is not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it is blood money.'" Elena shook her head in disbelief. "I used to just read past that, thinking of them as generic movie villains." Thomas nodded aggressively. "But look at the side-channel leak running through that bureaucracy. These men are perfectly comfortable funding a covert extrajudicial kidnapping, manipulating an angry crowd, and orchestrating a legal murder, but they completely halt the corporate machine to ensure the financial ledger is ritually clean according to temple policy. They are hyper-compliant with the technical rules while actively destroying a human life." Elena leaned her elbows on her knees, staring into the center of the circle. "That hits way too close to home. I've spent years in church environments where everything looked flawless on the surface. The optics were perfect, the policies were strictly followed, but underneath, people were being crushed, sidelined, or ignored. That's the leak. Toxic systems and toxic people will always use meticulous compliance to mask deep moral rot. They use the rules as a shield. David looked between them, asking, "So how does that help us live better tomorrow?" Elena responded firmly, "It means we stop letting ourselves be gaslit by polished public appearances. A faithful life requires us to look past organizational compliance and focus entirely on actual human safety and systemic justice. We have to care more about people than protecting institutional reputation." Leaving the courtroom behind, the focus of the circle moved out to the raw limestone terrain of Golgotha, where the physical reality of the execution forced them to confront how they handled suffering under pressure. Elena traced her finger along verse 34. "Let's look at this. They gave him wine to drink, mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink." I'll admit, I always thought this was just a random historical detail, like maybe it tasted bad, so he skipped it. David shook his head, explaining the background. Historically, it's much heavier than that. Wine mixed with gall or myrrh was a primitive narcotic. The Romans actually allowed it as a small mercy to dull the central nervous system and numb the raw, agonizing pain of execution. Elena looked up, the weight of the realization showing on her face, and Jesus tasted it, realized exactly what it was, and refused it. He explicitly chose full cognitive awareness. He refused to let his consciousness be chemically or emotionally dampened. He forced himself to stay completely awake, feeling the unvarnished reality of the trauma, without masking it. "That convicts me," she whispered, staring into her coffee cup. "Our modern church culture is completely obsessed with numbing pain. We preach a version of faith that feels like toxic positivity, slapping a verse on a tragedy, forcing a smile, telling people to just pray it away so we don't have to sit with their grief. We treat emotional numbness as a sign of spiritual maturity, but Jesus models the exact opposite here. He gives us a license to feel the raw, heavy weight of life's pain without trying to chemically or spiritually medicate it away with cheap platitudes. Living a better life means having the courage to face reality with absolute clarity, knowing that godliness isn't found in pretending everything is fine when it's not." Across the circle, Chloe shifted uncomfortably, holding her mug tighter, listening with intense focus, but keeping her thoughts to herself as the text moved into the 3 hours of darkness covering the land. "But then, look down at verse 48, Elena noted, breaking the brief silence. "Right before he dies, someone runs and gets a sponge soaked in sour wine, puts it on a reed, and gives it to him. And this time, he actually drinks it. Why reject the first wine, but accept the second?" Thomas smiled slightly, flipping his pages back a chapter to anchor the connection. "Look at the macro structure linking this back to the night before. In Matthew 26, during the Last Supper, Jesus abruptly disrupts the traditional Passover Seder. After the third cup, the cup of redemption, he stops the ritual completely. He tells the disciples in verse 29, "I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sing a hymn and leave for the garden. Alina's brow furrowed as she pieced it together. Wait, so the Passover meal was left unfinished? The fourth cup was put off? Thomas nodded, completely open-ended. A liturgical suspension hung over the entire crucifixion narrative. When Jesus drinks the sour Pascha on the cross, he is executing the command of John 18:11 and formally consuming the missing fourth cup, the cup of consummation, to legally and liturgically close the Passover ritual at the exact moment of his death. And the text leaks a physical optimization too. He takes that fluid to lubricate a failing, suffocated throat so he has the physical capacity to shout his final words with a loud voice. Elena let out a soft breath. It means God finishes what he starts. Even when the middle of the story looks like absolute chaos, failure, and dark silence, the overarching ritual is still being meticulously fulfilled. Thomas agreed, saying, "Exactly. That gives us the resilience to stand in our own messy, unfinished seasons. When our lives feel totally disrupted, we don't have to panic and assume God has abandoned the script." The chaotic noise of the cosmic signs dropped into a heavy silence as the body was wrapped in linen, and Sarah took control of the room, her voice steady and commanding. "I want to talk about the end of the chapter, because this is where the real paradigm shift happens for me. Look at verses 55 and 56. Many women were there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Rachel stopped typing on her tablet entirely, looking up to listen. "Think about the social landscape of first-century Judea," Sarah said, looking around the circle. Women had zero legal status. Their testimony was completely inadmissible in a court of law. They were legally invisible. Yet the text drops this massive side-channel leak. Where is the official inner circle? Where are the male disciples who held all the credentialed, prominent positions? Thomas answered quietly. They scattered. They ran away to protect their political capital and their lives. Sarah's voice rose with conviction. Exactly. The loud leaders fractured and hid in the dark, but this crowd of legally uncounted women remained completely stationary, occupying the dangerous physical space right next to the execution site. And when it says they had followed him from Galilee while ministering to him, the text leaks that the daily survival infrastructure of Jesus' entire movement, the money, the meals, the logistics, was quietly held together by women whose names are only explicitly written down by the camera when everyone else vanishes. David leaned forward, processing the shift. So while Rome and the Sanhedrin thought they were running the world, the actual continuity of the faith was being maintained by the people the system didn't even count. Sarah struck her hand against her knee. Yes, I have spent so many years feeling like a second-class citizen in church culture because I'm not the loud voice at the microphone or the leader with the title. But this text completely shatters that hierarchy. It proves that living a better Christian life isn't about chasing institutional power or being the most prominent person in the room. It's about the stubborn, quiet fidelity of showing up and staying present when everything else falls apart. Elena added softly, "The invisible people are the ones who keep the flame alive." Sarah closed her Bible with a decisive thud. Every single time, when we walk out that door tomorrow, we stop measuring our worth by who recognizes us, and we start measuring it by our willingness to stand by the cross when it matters most. The room went completely quiet again. The old, rigid formulas completely gone, replaced by a raw, livable reality.